time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnet Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
Good moment. This is Barnet Bain. I'm here with Freeman Michaels this morning. How about that new music? We have a new intro.
I'm smiling.
Man, I just feel like a sexy FM nighttime guy now.
Yeah.
Wow. He embarrassed me, that voice.
We need another station to pick us up on FM so we can officially say that we are.
That's some pretty sultry nighttime consciousness sounds.
Yeah.
My goodness.
It's good. We've upgraded.
Wow. Boy.
It's the bigger,
right,
better,
well, we're going to have to
newer,
live into
faster.
that. We have to live into that vision.
That's it.
Taking
we have to live into that.
Taking you through the little hours.
Live up to, live into.
Yeah.
Whatever the language is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, now that I'm settling into our new intro, that's it's great to be here. And how was your week?
Oh, it was great. It was so interesting. I had the opportunity to hang out with our mutual friend, Ray Blanchard.
Yep.
And do some work with him. Kind of powerful.
Yep.
Kind of powerful.
Kind of powerful.
That's kind of an understatement. Always powerful, I should say. And watch people's lives transform. Watch people really have those aha moments. I'll never, ever tire of seeing that click that goes off when people kind of get like, oh my gosh, there's a whole nother realm of possibility. To sort of watch that portal open up, you know, when people's eyes go bright and, you know, they're you know what happens is they become very present, right? The possibility opens up a sense of presence where they come into their bodies in a different way, and it's just fantastic. I kind of at this point live for that
pennies
stuff.
drop.
The pennies,
the scales fall off
drop.
the eyes. Well, you don't even have to watch it, because when it happens, you can feel it.
That's actually far more accurate. It's definitely a felt experience.
You can feel the shift.
And the room. I mean, the power of having 50 people in a room who have all been through a process and have experienced that click is palpable. Like you can taste it. It's in the air, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, there's a connectivity that we begin to sense into. I'm having a little challenge here with my phones. There we go. I think you're pointing to a fundamental truth that when we are in the presence, we can begin to discern with these very unfamiliar calibrators. We begin to discern the shifts of things in the room, as you say, when people suddenly get it. We begin to sense something. It's almost as if the air thickens in some way. And we get a sense of our connectivity, which threads back to a conversation that I had at dinner the night before last with some quite wonderful folks. And I have a feeling we're going to meet one of them fairly soon. But over dinner, we were talking about Indra's net. And very briefly, to this point about connectivity and feeling our connections. Indra was a Hindu god. Now, I thought Indra was a Hindu goddess, but I discovered at dinner that Indra is a Hindu god, which changes a couple of things, only at the level of costuming.
That's the film producer in you right there.
Yeah,
we're going to have to change the set here.
It's a whole new props and costuming thing. That whole boudoir thing has to go. It's too bad because I was really attached to it. So that's gone. But so Indra was a Hindu god, and he had this magnificent net. And the net was stretched into infinity. And at each of the places where the cross pieces of the net stitched together, hooked together, at the cross stitching, there was sewn into each cross stitching a beautiful jewel or a pearl. And the amazing thing about the pearl was that every pearl reflected every other pearl in the net. So just imagine that, a net that's stretched into infinity, and in each of the eyes is a pearl that reflects every other pearl in the net. And it is this fantastic, fantastic Vedic ancient metaphor for a holographic reality in which every pearl is separate and also connected with every other pearl in the infinity of all that is. And
I love that metaphor.
So when one pearl shakes and trembles at one extreme of the net, it is felt throughout the entire system. And as we've said often on this show, every action and every thought, every feeling and every emotion, every mood and every blip ripples across eternity. And we have a real sense, you had a real sense of that in the room with Ray as the penny dropped, and this wave, this ripple of intensity washed across the room. You felt it.
Yeah, and the imagined impact, because, you know, the way that this work extends out and becomes, you know, the ripple effect of people in the room.
Rippling.
Well, coming to this place, this glimpse of possibility, you know, whether they stay in it in a prolonged way or not, it's just the moment in time that there's that shift of awareness, where there's that possibility opens up, the portal opens up. I always say you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Once it's out, you know, it becomes something that we know is possible. And that's been my experience over the last, 20 years, or whatever it is. I mean, I had that moment, let's say 20 years ago, or whenever it was, but there was a moment where I knew this was going to be the course of my life for the rest of my life, right?
Sure. But that's why we have an ego. It is the ego, the negative ego's job anyway, the restrictive ego's job, is to put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Try to put the toothpaste back in the tube.
And in due course,
that's funny.
That will be a that job. You know, there's the ego is not up to the job of all that of challenging all that is, but has done a fairly good job of it thus far inside of time and space. A pretty good job, but. You know, when you're talking about what happens in the room, what happens in the room happens across the system.
That's it.
That's
so
what I'm
what's
talking that about. Wonderful thing about butterflies flapping and rice fields and all that stuff.
Right. That's right. So let's get your dinner company in the room, and let's invite them, because this is an extension of a conversation.
The dinner was so great. It was so great.
Well, let's get another opinion on that.
I only have half the dinner company with us.
Only half.
So I'm going to acknowledge the missing half.
Please.
We wish that you were here with us, Bob, but we do have with us Dr. Judith Wright, who is a renowned corporate consultant and human development expert. She's a world-class coach and a best-selling author of There Must Be More Than This and The One Decision and The Soft Addiction Solution. Her new book, co-written with Bob Wright, Dr. Bob Wright, is The Science. It's called Transformed, The Science of Spectacular Living. It's an amazing piece of scholarly, and I'm holding it up for those of you who watch us on YouTube. You can see it held up on camera. So we are very, very grateful to have Judith Wright with us. She's also the co-founder and of the Wright Foundation for Transformational Leadership in Chicago. Judith, thank you for being with us.
Welcome to the show, Judith.
Great being with you. Thanks.
Yeah, was the dinner as good as Barnett says it was?
Oh, I think it was better.
There you go. That's what he needed.
You can come back.
That's how you get back on the show.
We were experiencing everything that you've just been talking about, and co-creating that with one another was just blissful and blessed.
Well, you know, this is the power of this process and this the journey that we're all on, is that as much as we all have our, you know, professional credentials and our expertise, there's always another edge. It's sort of the it's what this show is about, right? We want to work, we want to move to the edge, and so each of us has an individual edge, and that's the brilliance of it, is that in spite of, you know, all of the moments in time where we experience, I call them clicks, right? A click into a paradigm shift where things open up. There's a point at which we become really attracted to the edge, because we know that's where the clicks occur. And I'm assuming that the conversation was one of those conversations of playing at the edge.
You know, I think it was like the pleasure of multiple clicks, because there's something about just really experiencing that and the excitement of that, and then the opening of really connecting to yourself and to one another and to a greater truth at the same time. It's just blessed. It's such a wonderful experience, and I think that we're all trying to do more in our own lives and be agents of that, and with others as well.
Well, you have in your personal history, you shared with me an example of one of the more dramatic examples of what we're talking about. And so I will set this up, and then I'm going to invite you to run the ball afterwards. You were talking about work you were doing with infants, and you were exploring your explorations led you to a much deeper awareness about the nature of dyadic consciousness. And I would love you to share with our listeners a little bit about that journey.
Oh, I'd love to do that. Early in my career, I set up model programs for little children with developmental disabilities and their families. And I did research and ran the programs and coached the families and worked with staff and developed model ways to deal with these little beings. But these little babies, or from birth to 3, had all kinds of developmental issues. They had cerebral palsy, mentally retarded, they were blind, they had developmental delays, all kinds of combinations of things, to little babies, little beings who couldn't lift their heads, or it would be a long time before they'd be able to form something resembling a word, or they couldn't really make eye contact. And what I found in working with the parents was, working with the professionals was one thing, really being able to see these little beings as whole beings. That was a whole other line of inquiry. But in working with the parents, to really be with these little babies, they were, this will sound a little odd, I think, maybe, but they were hard to love. But let me tell you why not. Because you would go to hug them, and their musculature was such that they would arch their backs and stretch their arms away from you. So it feels immediately rejecting. Or you're trying to, make eye contact with them, and you can't get that visceral back and forth that you're really used to really get that affirmation. And it was very tough for these families. And one of the things we saw is that the families had actually allowed themselves to go through a grieving process to grieve the loss of the child they thought they were going to have, so they then could accept and love the child they were given.
Right.
Something really beautiful.
Yeah.
And out of that. But what we tried to do is really help them. It really trained me so much, because it was, how do I be in relationship with this being who isn't reflecting back in the socially appropriate ways I'm used to? How do I be present with this little one? How do I make contact? And how do I read the cues that are not just the ones I'm so used to, and really connect? So it taught me a ton about being in the present moment and being very present with another human being, whether it was a baby or an adult. And we do videotapes of these interactions and then analyze them moment by moment so we could understand the subtleties of that. And there's other infant mental health research, other people were working at the time trying to discover more of this. And I just ran across an article a little while ago by one of the MDs and infant researchers we had worked with. And he was writing about something we were looking at then that he's developed, and what Barnett's talking about, this dyadic state of consciousness. And what's so beautiful about it is that, if you think about consciousness being how your brain organization, how you organize your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions and your behaviors, if you look at that what we're finding and what he was finding as he's looking at these interactions, as we were too, just didn't have the words for it, but what we're finding is that for a mother and a baby in that instance, that mother and baby are forming a dyadic consciousness, and the mother's consciousness is organizing the baby's consciousness, and the baby's consciousness is organizing the mother's, and now we have something that's greater than the sum of the parts. There's something greater than the two of them.
But there's a piece here that's critical that you alluded to over dinner. Initially, it is the mother's consciousness that is wiring the neuronal net of the child. That neural net, that Indra's net, that little scaled down net is incomplete at birth.
Yeah, and we're designed that way, it appears. So we come into birth with all these little we have all these neurons, all these possibilities, but they're not connected yet. They haven't formed a lot of neural nets yet. And in fact, they're dependent upon experience-dependent neurogenesis. You have to have the interactions for those little neurons to fire, and then when they fire together, they wire together. Mm-hmm. And as they do that repeatedly, it becomes these neural nets, this pathway, our matrix, so to speak. So in essence, the primary caregiver, let's say mother, as it more often is, her brain, her consciousness is like the external cortex for the baby, and the wiring's taking place in that interaction. So her nervous system and her consciousness is being wired into the baby, and is part of that formation of who we are. Even how we deal with our emotions, our neurotransmitters and hormones, and emotions, all that's getting that net, that Indra's net's being laid down.
Now, if it's interrupted, as it often is early, certainly the wiring is already underway while the child is in utero. If it's interrupted, then what gets wired in is this trauma, and things, and the brain begins to become rewired, perhaps with a new parenting influence, and then these are patterns that begin to show up as challenges. They get evidenced throughout the remainder of life.
And I think it's totally right. I think it's at a level it happens for all of us, because if you think about it, obviously we're all being wired by our mothers who are wired by theirs. But just think about it. If your mother, let's say you're born and she has a toddler, and her husband just lost his job, and there's pressures or whatever, just normal things of life, she might take care of you in maybe a distracted, kind of hurried way. Well, that's sending little emotional messages to your little being that you can't sort through, like, oh, my needs are a bother, or I'm too much. And that kind of explains how all of us at some level have a little kernel of something that's not true, but we believe to be true, that we're not okay, or we're too much, or not enough.
And this is, in fact, where the opportunity to rewire is so critical. Listen, we need to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to finish up on how this all gets set into play, but I really also want to shift into the neuroplasticity and how, because I love the way you speak about that in the book and how you refer to that. So let's come back. We'll talk a little about, the wiring, but also the rewiring, and we'll do that after these messages. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here with Barnet Bain and our guest, Dr. Judith Wright, author of Transformed, with her husband, Dr. Bob Wright. And before we went to break, we were, Judith, you were unpacking a little bit how some of the initial wiring is laid vis-a-vis these sort of intense versions of the process, namely these developmentally challenged children, where you really got a sense of what was required to lay, if you will, the kind of wiring that was going to be helpful for these children who were under sort of extreme circumstances, but it set up an understanding of the initial wiring process. And I want to kind of finish up on that and then transition to the rewiring process, which of course is the subject of your book Transformed and is something that we're very interested in. So do you mind picking up a little bit where we left off? That's
great. I mean, if you really look at it, that we're forming those neural nets through that interaction with our primary caregivers and the neural pathways, which then become our beliefs about ourselves and how we see the world, are getting wired in there. So Jack Mesereau is this founder of transformative education. He says, the purpose of childhood is formation. The purpose of adulthood is transformation. And I like that distinction, because that formation has to happen. We have to have something in the raw materials to work with, that sense of self, who we kind of wind up being in that way. But then as adults, it's our job to take over our learning and growing and transforming, and that forming, what we call it, rematrixing. So we form a matrix in our childhood, but it's our responsibility to rematrix and form new neural pathways and new ways of thinking, believing, and seeing and acting that are more in consonance with what we value and more in consciousness with a higher consciousness.
And so to pull this thread a little farther, this is this is what we are all doing to each other all of the time.
All the time.
100% of the time. It's the reason I brought it up is because when we focus down on the relationship between a mother and a child, or a caregiver and a small child, whether this is an entirely healthy child or this is a challenged child, when it's a one-to-one, it becomes more clear, and now we have science and as well as anecdotal evidence to support that we are wiring each other. But we can very quickly extrapolate from that the process of transformation is to allow ourselves to give and receive new wiring, new messaging, new connections in a way that uplifts and raises all boats. And so we are really only talking about again this separate yet connected, interconnected net. When we transform the self, we transform the system.
This is so beautiful. I mean, it's why I'm so excited about these funny brain science terms of neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, because it really helps us see that, I mean, we are all connected. We have social brains. We're connected like we're on neural Wi-Fi. And our consciousness is affecting one another and helping each other organize our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors and how we see the world. It's all happening all the time. But what I think is really also interesting is if we understand what it really takes to take advantage of that. You know, when we started our research about our new book, it was studying people who lived really great lives. People that had that, their lights are on. It's experiences you were talking about in the beginning of the program. They just said, and really seeing what is it that they do, and found they do follow a process. But one of it is they really do take on this rematrixing in a really dedicated way, because when you understand how the brain works, we do have neuroplasticity, but it's not the same as children. Children learn, you just put them in a stimulating environment, and they just pick up everything. All the connections happen. We don't have the same kind of growth hormones in the brain that children have. They're there, but it has to be activated in a totally different way. And this is what's so beautiful. We activate that being able to transform ourselves, that rematrixing, that neuroplasticity, through consciousness, through intent, through novelty, through connection, through being present in that moment. Because all these things could happen, but if we're not present to it, if we're not consciously engaging in our own transformation, we won't get the full neuroplasticity and the full benefit of that.
And I love the description, going back to the story, where you were recognizing how present you need to be with these developmentally disabled children. And what I love about that is your choices are organizing around a clarity of intent, right?
Yeah.
That's the powerful, because Barnett and I have talked a lot about how we buy into certain ideas about who we are, what's possible, how the world works, and we organize our choices around that. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of a small story. I mean, it's okay, it's normal, but then there become these moments where your commitment to the service, to the child, it was bigger than you, what you were up to in that moment, which created clarity of intent, which created a presence, right? Because again, we're talking about a being state. It's not a doing. Right. One of the trip chords for most of us who have been, conditioned and programmed within this collective experience is that we're really hooked on doing. We want to take action, which is fine. There's no problem with that. But with clarity of intent, the actions become very subtle because the presence is what the focus is on.
Well, it's profound, and the way you're speaking is it's right on. I just want to add another aspect to the presence, because it is that intent, and that's kind of like almost like the chisel that creates, cuts through your marble or brings out that magnificence in there. But I think the other thing is that people sometimes think it's just a mental activity, but presence is an embodied experience. It's an emotional experience. It's being in touch with your heart and the feelings that you're having in the moment, whatever that is. It's fear, hurt, anger, sadness, joy, any of that. The more we have that available, the more present we are to ourselves, the more present we are to one another. And they're finding out also as we interact with one another, having those emotions available bring us more present, and actually, when they're well dealt with, help us really in that rematrixing, that transformation. So it's really beautiful, mind, body, heart, spirit presence that really makes these differences for us.
Well, we tend to talk of consciousness as a brain function.
Yeah.
It's a very, very slippery slope, because even as we're speaking now on this program, we're talking about neuroplasticity, and of course, we are looking at the tip of the iceberg, because it is a place where we are beginning to be able to read into the entire system. We'll be able to, by understanding the map, if you will, that's provided in through brain research, we can begin to have insights into an entire system, but the map is not the territory.
I think that's well put, and it really, without our hearts involved, it doesn't have the same value or directionality. You know, I kind of think about it like if I go to the brain again, but some people think brain is mental, but if we think of our frontal lobes, that more recently evolved part of our brain, that is our seat of intent, and it's also what people call it the throne of divinity. It's like why we have a third eye or laurel wreaths around the forehead. There's something beautiful going on in that part of us. But it's not just mental. It's kind of the orchestrator, if you will. It's the part that's bringing all of us together. It's the part that's pulling our senses and our emotions and our thoughts and our feelings and our beliefs and coordinating all of that. So when we talk about it, I just want to expand that so that we know that it's not just mental, it's really this beautiful orchestration of all aspects of our humanity.
And some part of us obviously knows that, but again, it's so valuable to look at the science to have it confirmed. I'm thinking specifically, we've had friends on this show, Mark Waldman and Andy Newberg, who wrote How God Changes the Brain. Mario Beauregard at University of Montreal has done a tremendous amount of work in studying what he calls the God module, but the areas of the brain that light up. And it's interesting, just yesterday I was reading a study about cooperation versus competition, and I was seeing the brain scans and seeing again what areas light up. So, you know, I can say it feels really good to cooperate, but it's nice to say, look, here's the physiological shift when we move from cooperation, from competition to cooperation in terms of these areas of the brain that we know are associated with good feelings and a sense of connection and all these other things. So I'm just echoing what Barnett was saying, is that we intuitively can understand this, but I personally really enjoy having this other mirror that can reflect back this thing that I know and substantiate it in another way.
I love that, too. There's something, you know, I'm kind of a combination of a scholar and a mystic and someone who's pretty intuitive and in touch with my emotions to the best of my ability. I hope that continues to grow. But it really is, I love my experience, and then I love reading and learning about something that describes my experience or explains it.
I love that.
I love that back and forth because it helps me actually ground it more fully and own it more fully. It kind of, maybe it involves all parts of myself because my heart's in it with the experience, but then I understand how it works. And it's very thrilling to me. It's almost this beautiful discovery. It's like unlocking the secrets.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's the unlocking, there's the becoming more and more intimate with the recovery of self and the ownership of the self. And then at the same time, there is the exploration of the more of me that with which I have no conscious relationship, but inside of which I dwell.
But we're moving back to the edge again, right?
We get to the edge, we cross it, we come back, we assimilate it, we move to the edge, we cross it, we come back, we assimilate it. It's this act of conscious creativity that is love's work. You move to the edge, you transcend your boundaries, and then you include it, and you become larger. You bring it back, move to the edge again. So there's always this, it's an inhale and an exhale. There's always, in everything, there's this sense of frequency, of amplitude.
This is beautiful. You know, we have a term we call evolating, and it's a Latin word that means the unfurling and the unrolling and the flying up and out, as opposed to evolution, which is kind of a gradual adaptation to things that already exist. Because what you're talking about, when you're on the edge, something new is forming. We call it like the emergence. We call it the emergence of your next most radiant self, a you haven't even met yet.
Yes.
You know, and
yes.
how beautiful is that?
That's it. Yeah,
Yes.
no, and this idea that there's Barnett likes to say there's a bridge, and on the other side of the bridge, we don't know what's there. It's this mystery. It's a relationship with mystery. And I know from my own work, when I can bring mystery in the room, as well as a sense of humility and my heart and my positive intent and what I'm up to creating, but that element of I don't know. At one point in my life, that was very scary, and I was really committed to tracking back and knowing and winning and owning and whatever, control or whatever. But my own, I'm not going to get the word right, not evaluating, no, it's just
Evelating.
Evelating. That may take me a minute to learn that word. My own evelating has taught me the value of I don't know. We call it the sacred I don't know. I don't know. And when I can get that in the room, it opens up possibility for me to find something, which is glorious, right?
Well, I still think it's scary, although now I can add thrilling.
Scary and thrilling.
Yeah.
Scary and thrilling.
I just was reading about the existentialists talk about authenticity, and we all want to be authentic, but what I loved about what many of them talked about, it was being authentic means being true to who you could become. It's being true to who's undiscovered yet.
That's a big reframe. So I want you to repeat that.
That is a massive reframe, because we hear the word authentic, trounced around a lot, and that's brilliant.
It's generally from the very smallest, youngest parts of ourselves.
Right.
It means our hands fly up and we take responsibility out of a sense of guilt and discovery.
Right.
But I really would love to hear that again from you, Judith.
Well, the existential philosophers talked about authenticity as being true to who you could become, not just being true to who you've been, becoming true to who you could become.
True to the parts of us that wait at the edge of our possibilities.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, we have come, I'm afraid, to the edge of our possibilities this beautiful day. And we're very, very grateful that you have joined us this morning.
Absolutely.
We hope that you'll agree to come back, and that maybe next time we'll have Bob with us as well.
Love that. I'd love to be back together. This is great. I'm stimulated. My consciousness is expanded through our expanded consciousness.
Our neural Wi-Fi.
We're
I
evelated.
love that, by the way. The neural Wi-Fi has us evelating.
I'm feeling very, very evelated here. We're going to step away and hear from our sponsors.
But
before
before we do, I want to give folks the website and the ways in which they can contact you, Judith.
Good catch.
Great, thank you. It's at judithwright.com. That's right with a W, judithwright.com. It's a great way to make contact and find out about, there's all kinds of free goodies and supports for consciousness and living great lives there, and I'd love to hear from people.
Awesome.
You will also be able to receive more information about where Judith, what Judith is up to, and where you can reach her on the Cutting Edge Consciousness site.
And please stay with us, because we'll be back after these messages to wrap this up here on Cutting Edge Consciousness.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here with Barnet Bain.
Thank you for staying with us. That was quite a conversation with Dr. Judith Wright. Her new book, Transformed, is a gold mine. It is a treasure chest of tools and insights and
language, evelating. And the neural Wi-Fi, I think, is fantastic.
That's pretty good too, isn't it?
The idea,
we're going to have to borrow that.
We will. We're borrowing it quite a bit. But the idea that we're transmitting and receiving, which isn't new or news to us, we've been talking about this, but that it's actually now captured in a little piece of language that relates to technology. We did our show last week where we had Deborah Rosman from HeartMath, and we were talking about this idea that the heart coherence, and that we're always transmitting a kind of frequency, and that is has an impact on our world as we see it and how we interact with it, and so forth and so on. I'm amazed how technology operates as a mirror.
Everything does. So
of course it does. Of course it does.
So when we talk about technology, or when she talks about brain work, what we learn from neurobiology and neuroscience, these are maps that give us a clue not to the territory of the brain so much as to the nature of the system.
Yes.
In the same way that the heart math research likewise gives us an insight into the deeper, the more true nature of quantum reality. So, and the more true nature of quantum reality that is being hinted at, pointed to, both in these kinds of very, very sophisticated research and in technology as, at this point, as mundane, wonderful, and yet as accepted as the World Wide Web. All of these symbols, all of these are metaphors that point to the truer nature of who we really are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the only reason I bring it up is because it's a way that you and I talk a lot about expanding capacity to handle certain things, because, it's very, the whole idea of a paradigm shift is very disorganizing, at least initially. It's questioning what we've known. It's again, the edge. While you and I have recognized the value in going to the edge, and we love splashing around in those sort of murky waters, the discomfort inherent in shifting and changing and being open to possibility and really inviting in mystery. Most folks aren't. But there's this interesting thing about technology where we've said it's sort of a siloed way that people can pick up some of this stuff. And the language of it is brilliant.
And art?
Of course, yeah, art is another brilliant way. Absolutely.
And love?
Yes, indeed. It's going to come back to love,
and nature,
and nature, sure.
But the paradigm shift that we refer to, I mean, we get more clues. We have a more intimacy with what is emerging.
Yep.
It's no longer what is in store.
Right.
It's simply opening our eyes to what already is. It is this move from an orientation towards the world that reduces all that is into a container that is very logical, that has absolutes and has guarantees attached to it. It reduces it to something called cause leads to effect. And what we're discovering, and it's very chaotic now because we hang on to cause leads to effect, but more and more we see that from science and experientially, more and more we're being clued into the thing that it's actually the other way around. Effects lead to causes. The effect happens first, and then our brains and our choices and our decisions scramble to fill in the blank with a bunch of causes so that we can make sense of it in time.
Right.
The effect in this case that leads to cause is a being state. If it's a state of agitation, we will find all kinds of reasons to be agitated. If it's a state of heartful connection, we will find all kinds of reasons and stories to support heartful connection.
Yeah, and it's a possibility that, again, already exists. We find it and reorganize or remalleate, the neuroplasticity, which we didn't get to talk a lot about, but of course you and I understand enough to sort of speak to it, where we actually are reorganizing in our various structures to handle it.
The neural nets that are the maps that mark in many ways what our habituated responses to life, how they are laid down.
Yeah.
When those are refashioned, our responses to life can be different. In fact, they can be brand new. And in fact, they can go from one set of responses to an entirely different set of responses. It's a shift that is no less than a quantum shift, because there is no such thing as there's no such thing as a continuum of things. Everything is either on or off, on or off, on or off, in the way that once upon a time, not very long ago, we used to run film through cameras and projectors at 24, 25 frames a second. And at that speed, it looks like a continuity. But in fact, it was on, off, 24, 25, totally different images all at the same time. In that way, myelinated neuronal nets are very similar. If you switch out the way things are wired and firing, you allow, it's almost like cutting in new frames of film. You can go off in entirely new storylines that heretofore were impossible.
Right. So what, I guess to put this in as simple terms as possible, is that these portals of possibility open up. They open up in a moment, what feels like a moment in time. The truth is they exist as a possibility. And we even talk about them in terms...
What do you mean by the portals of possibility?
So I want to go back to the way that we've described it in the past. When we talk about love, for example,
Mm-hmm.
that the vibratory quality of love, of our... it's so hard because the language so often tracks us back to a way we've held it that in this moment in time for me isn't sufficient. But I'm going to do my best because that's what we try to do on this show, is wander off the reservation.
Should be called From Cutting Edge Consciousness to We Do Our Best Consciousness.
Here's the way we've described it in the past. We talk about real and more real and more real. She talked about, this is what Judith was talking about when she said authenticity is a relationship with who we can be, right? So it is our essential nature, but we can't skip steps. We don't know it until we know it. But in the moment that we arrive in a connection with a child, the conversation she was having about, being present to this child, and that space that she went into with that, that's not something you can plan or plot. You can't have it as, this is what I'm going for. But in the moment...
Why not?
Well, let me say it this way. In the moment you're in it, it's entirely familiar, and you know it. I've said this before, and I hate to constantly reference back to the same sort of analogies, but they're what I've got. So that line from Frankie and Johnny when she gets overwhelmed at the intensity of their connection, and she says, but I don't know you, and he says, you do know me. You've known me your entire life, and I've known you, but now we're here. That's, to me, captures that moment of what I would say dropping into a kind of authenticity, but it's not something, in my experience, and maybe you have a different experience of this, that when I try to plot it or plan it or control it, I mean, I have some navigators that have been helpful to kind of get me into that space, but it still always has that element of mystery, right? It's always...
Well, you can't control it.
Right.
But you do set an intention.
Absolutely.
To love and to grow. You do set an intention to be as authentic as you can, which means as honest with myself as I can be, as honest with with what I am in touch with the truths about myself that I am in touch with. How honest can I be with them? And in that way, I think what Judith said about authenticity being the relationship with who you can be, the best that you can be, that makes a great deal of sense to me. I like the idea of I like to introduce humility into this equation right now,
Sure.
Because I think they go hand in hand. Humility for me is not about walking around cap in hand.
No.
But it is about being certain about my world and yet willing to get off my certainty in an instant. That even though everything that I know about myself and the way I hold things has been one way, in the very next instant, my relationship with mystery is such that it can all be different.
That's right.
So that definition of humility coupled with Judith's definition of authenticity, being intimate with who you can be, the best that you can be, that is like a prescription for, that's like having your hand on the tiller of a sailboat, sailing off towards something great.
Right.
with an intention, but no sense of control, but a certain mastery. So it's not without it is not without doing. But it is without manipulation.
Well, it's the agenda that we become aware of in this process, where if I can put down my agenda and be, as you put it, in the intention, I'm giving up the illusion of control, and I'm allowing things to play out. Then the effects or the outcomes or whatever, I marvel at them, but I know them. I know them, and I'm not confused by them.
There is a harmonic of resonance that goes along with being authentic in that way and having humility in that way. What comes along with it, what is born out of the marriage of those two energies, is an expectation that something is going to be discovered. And out of my authenticity, out of my humility, something is going to blossom. There is an expectation there. And so sometimes when we hear, oh, you can't have any expectations, well, that's actually control.
It is. And the gratitude or the humility or the blessing of the magical moments where it is realized.
The magical moments that you're talking about, those peak experiences you're talking about, those are the being states that we want to cultivate. When we have them, we go, oh my goodness, I remember. Just the memory of it begins to rewire you. It begins to, the atrophying of the way we were wired before becomes, that happens, and we are rewiring a new set of possibility and feeding energy in a new way into the system, and beginning, there is no doing in that,
right?
But it is being open and willing to develop a love affair with a being state. And that being state, those peak moments, they can and will increasingly become more frequent, and at some point they will be that is the default state.
It is.
And then when we take action inside of that, there's that old kind of Zen koan, or that story about what you chop wood and you chop wood and you carry wood and you what is that? Chop wood and
I don't know the story.
Is that something about like, what does it look like? You chop wood and you bag rice or something, and then when you have more lights lit, what does it look like after that? After you're enlightened, said the Buddha. Well, you're still chopping wood and carrying rice or whatever it is.
Right.
But you're doing it in an entirely different frequency of experience.
Right. The quality of experience changes.
The quality of experience and the frequency, the being state you're doing it in changes.
Yes. Yes. So, look, I know this has been said before.
What is that? Chop wood?
I don't
carry
know.
lumber?
I don't know. I've never heard that. The Buddha and I didn't hang out.
Anybody know in the room?
Yeah. Let's get that fixed. I'm sure someone will write us.
Write us in and help us.
help
us out. And let us know how you like the new intro music.
Yeah, we'll get that too. The point that I want to make is the bigger, it's not the right word, the deeper, the more profound me, the birthright of mine,
the
yours,
more of me.
The more of me, thank you. The more of me is what I want to be intimate with. And it's okay that the less of me or the small story or the parts of me come along. That's okay.
Has to come along.
It does. It's included. It's part of the entire thing, the warp and weave of my life. It's part of the net. It's part of the pearl, right? But the sense that there's something bigger than how I've held my reality, for me at this point, is a tremendous gift. We kind of covered this in the segment.
if you can say right now, if you can talk in those compassionate terms about the lesser aspects of you, the less tools, less ability to respond, if you're able to have perspective of that, that is the exact same frequency flipped on the other side that has a relationship with the more of you.
That's it.
So right there we are in an entirely different being state.
That's it. And that brings around the...
Chop wood, carry water.
Chop wood.
Thank you.
We knew our engineer could Google it in time, so we didn't end the show feeling helpless and lost and confused.
Wood, carry water.
That is funny. Yeah, so look, we'll all chop wood and carry water.
And when we are transformed and uplifted and enlightened and firing on more cylinders, and have more of a sense of emergent capacities and more grace and more graceful and more grace-filled, it will still look like we're chopping wood or carrying water. Or not, because I have enough humility to say, and maybe not.
Right. But it will be in a resonant sense that there's nothing that needs to be different and that everything is perfect. And the resonance, the resonant quality is a sense of love. That's the point we come to, where everything is an expression of love. Even the parts that have not felt that way get loved, which in what you were just saying shifts it energetically to where we're holding it in a more expanded consciousness, a way of holding that's far more constructive than the incessant trying to fix and solve and control and so forth and so on. It's okay. We're going to love that part too. But in the instant that we do that, we elevate the game. And that's what consciousness is. That's what this conversation is. So, we know that possibility is about playing at the edge and marveling in the clicks and the moments that we pop through and go, wow, I can see the whole picture. I'm not trying to effort. I've really, in that moment, put down my agenda. And the moment after, the agenda's back. But that's okay, too, because we understand that comes along the ride.
Well, I love what you just said. I, for a long time, felt that wisdom, the discovery of wisdom, is about being in touch with a bigger picture.
Indeed.
Without losing sight of the current picture.
And the current picture is we need to say goodbye. So we thank you all for listening. We invite you to keep coming back to Cutting Edge Consciousness.